frost and flame. The villagers called them the eternal mountains, the towering peaks that pierced the clouds like ancient spears of ice. From my vantage point in my steam-powered snowmobile, their jagged silhouettes cut against the pewter sky like a crown of crystal thorns. I called them my next great challenge, though the word challenge felt inadequate as I watched storm clouds gather around their peaks, dark and heavy with winter's fury. As my vehicle crawled up the narrow mountain path, the engine's steady purr competed with the howling wind. The instrument panel cast a warm glow of brass and copper light across my gloved hands, the metal surfaces polished to mirror brightness from years of use. Steam hissed through carefully calibrated valves, smelling of oil and metal and adventure. Beyond the reinforced glass windows, snowflakes danced in hypnotic patterns, each unique crystal catching the light before joining its brethren in the deepening drifts. I hadn't come to these remote heights for the legends, though the innkeeper in the last town had filled my ears with tales of the mysterious Snow Maiden who protected these peaks. I still remembered how her eyes had widened when I mentioned my destination, how her weathered hands had clutched at her shawl as she spoke of a being who walked through blizzards as easily as summer breezes, her presence turning even the deadliest storms into gentle snowfall. "She's saved us all, one way or another," the innkeeper had said, her voice dropping to a whisper heavy with reverence. "But never look directly at her, my boy. Her beauty freezes the heart as surely as the deepest winter." I had smiled politely, more focused on checking my equipment than heeding supernatural warnings. I sought inspiration for my next invention. Perhaps something to help humanity survive in these harsh climates. My workshop back in the city was filled with half-finished projects, each one reaching toward the same goal, bridging the gap between human fragility and nature's raw power. Yet, as the storm intensified and my visibility dropped to mere feet, those dismissed warnings began to echo in my mind. The wind's howl took on an almost musical quality, like a chorus of voices just beyond comprehension. The snow itself seemed to move with purpose, swirling in patterns too precise to be natural. The first sign of real trouble came with a sound like thunder, except thunder had no place in a snowstorm. I looked up through the glass dome of my vehicle to see a wall of white racing down the mountainside. The avalanche moved faster than any natural phenomenon should, as if driven by an intelligent malice. In the heart of the cascading snow, I could have sworn I saw a figure of darker white, like a shadow cast by winter itself. I gunned the engine, but the snow was already upon me. The world turned white, then black. Metal screamed as my vehicle was tossed like a child's toy. Glass cracked in crystalline spiderwebs across my vision. The last thing I remembered was a flash of silver-white hair and eyes that glowed like the heart of a glacier, filled with an ancient sorrow that called to something deep within my soul. When I woke, I lay in a cave of ice that sparkled with its own inner light. Layers of color shifted through the frozen walls, deep blues, subtle purples, hints of green, creating an aurora in miniature. My body should have been frozen, but warmth emanated from the very walls around me, as if the ice itself had been transformed into something that defied natural law. And there she stood, the figure from my fading memories, real as the cold air in my lungs, real and more breathtaking than any legend could have prepared me for. Her dress seemed woven from snowflakes, each movement creating cascades of crystalline light that played across the cave walls. Her skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight on fresh snow, translucent enough that I could almost see the gentle pulse of power beneath. Her hair floated around her face as if suspended in water, each strand catching and refracting light like strands of living crystal. But it was her eyes that captured me, blue as the deepest ice, ancient and lonely as winter itself. Within their depths, I saw centuries of solitude, of watching mortal lives flash by like summer flowers, while she remained unchanging as the eternal snows. In that moment, all my scientific certainties crumbled like frost beneath the sun. "You shouldn't have come here, Ren Nakamura," she said, her voice like wind through icicles, musical and sharp and haunting. "These mountains are not safe for dreamers." Frost spiraled across the cave floor where she stepped, creating intricate patterns that reminded me of the blueprints scattered across my workshop desk. I pushed myself up, wincing at my bruised muscles. The air around me sparkled with tiny ice crystals that caught the ethereal light, creating halos of rainbow color. "You know my name? I know all who enter my domain." She moved closer, and the air around her shimmered with frost that smelled of winter roses and pine needles. Her presence brought a chill that somehow felt intimate rather than threatening, like the first breath of winter through an open window. "Just as I know you don't believe in me. The Snow Maiden of legend." I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. All my scientific certainties melted in her presence, replaced by a deeper kind of knowing. My fingers itched to reach for her, to prove her solidity despite her ethereal appearance. "But you're real. Real enough to save you." Her expression softened slightly, and the temperature in the cave rose a fraction. A strand of her crystalline hair drifted close enough to brush my cheek, leaving a trail of tingling warmth and cold that lingered like a caress. "But you must leave when the storm passes. There are forces stirring in these mountains that even I cannot protect you from." "What forces? What are you protecting these people from?" I took a step toward her, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The air between us grew thick with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. She turned away, her form becoming translucent at the edges. The scent of winter roses intensified, mixing with an ancient smell of ice and stone. "Some questions are better left in the snow, inventor. For now, rest. Dawn comes soon." Her voice carried notes of longing that belied her warning words. Dreams are dangerous things in these mountains. They have a way of coming true. Before I could respond, she melted into the air like snow in sunlight, leaving only a lingering trace of her presence. A slight warmth in the usually bitter cold, a faint shimmer in the air, and the haunting sense of something vital left unfinished. When I woke again, I lay in a normal cave, my vehicle somehow intact beside me. Sunlight filtered through a thin sheet of ice across the entrance, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the stone walls. Only a lingering scent of winter roses suggested I hadn't dreamed the whole encounter. I should have listened. Should have descended the mountain and returned to my comfortable workshop in the city, where science made sense and magic was safely confined to children's stories. But her eyes haunted me. Not their supernatural glow, but the profound solitude I'd glimpsed within them. No one should carry such loneliness, not even a spirit of winter. The village of Blythewood welcomed me with surprised warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting mountain air. Smoke rose from stone chimneys in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of pine wood and cooking spices. Children played in the snow-covered streets, their laughter bright as silver bells, while adults went about their work with the unhurried confidence of those long adapted to winter's ways. Few outsiders brave the high passes, the village elder told me over steaming cups of pine needle tea. The liquid glowed amber in carved crystal cups that caught and reflected the firelight. Her wrinkled hands cupped her drink as she studied me with eyes wise as the mountains themselves. "The Snow Maiden guides worthy travelers to us," they say. Perhaps she sees something in you. I didn't tell her about my encounter in the cave, but my silence seemed answer enough. She nodded as if confirming something to herself and pressed a small crystal into my palm. It felt warm despite its icy appearance, pulsing gently like a tiny heartbeat. "For protection," she said simply, "and perhaps for connection." I set up my workshop in an abandoned barn at the village edge, close to the wild boundaries of the forest where civilization melted into winter's domain. The building's weathered wooden walls held the patina of ages, smooth and silver as frost. I spent the first days reinforcing the structure, adding my own inventions: copper pipes that carried steam heat, brass valves that regulated temperature, delicate instruments that measured the mountain's moods. The villagers watched my work with curious respect, bringing gifts of thick blankets woven with patterns of snowflakes and stars, jars of preserved mountain berries that burst with summer's sweetness, and stories. Always stories, each one adding another layer to my understanding of their mysterious protector. By day, I worked on my inventions, new heating systems that didn't fight against the cold but worked in harmony with it, more efficient snow-clearing devices that moved with winter's natural rhythms. The crystal the elder had given me sat on my workbench, its warm pulse synchronizing with my heartbeat as I worked. By night, I listened to the villagers' tales of their mysterious protector. They spoke of blizzards calmed by her presence, of dying crops saved by her blessed frost, of children rescued from winter's grasp. In their stories, she was both terrible and tender, as changeable as the mountain weather, yet as constant as the eternal snows. Yet none had seen her as I had. None knew she could speak, or that she bore such weight in her immortal heart. None mentioned the profound loneliness I'd glimpsed in her glacier blue eyes. The second time I saw her, I was tracking an unusual energy reading deep in the forest. My instruments had detected something that defied scientific explanation. A cold that burned, a power that made the compass needle spin in impossible directions. The crystal in my pocket pulsed stronger with each step into the wilderness. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell in perfect silence, each flake drifting with deliberate grace. Ice coated the tree branches in layers that caught the fading light, creating a cathedral of frozen beauty. My breath fogged in the air, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter, winter roses. She emerged from a curtain of falling snow, more substantial than before. Her presence brought that familiar mix of warmth and cold that I'd started to crave like a fever. Frost patterns spiraled out from her feet, creating trails of ice that matched the racing of my heart. "I warned you to leave." Her voice carried notes of concern that belied her stern words. A snowflake landed on her cheek and didn't melt, adding to her crystalline beauty. I couldn't. The truth fell from my lips like fresh snow, pure and unstoppable. My fingers tightened around the crystal in my pocket, feeling its pulse quicken to match my own. Not without understanding. Understanding brings only pain, Ren. She spoke my name like a half-forgotten lullaby, each syllable carrying centuries of longing. The air between us grew thick with unspoken possibilities. Knowledge is not always a gift. Then let me share the burden of it. I stepped closer, watching the frost patterns shift and swirl around her feet in response to her emotions. You don't have to carry it alone. She studied me for a long moment, her eternal winter meeting my mortal warmth. The snow between us fell slower. Finally, she held out her hand. Frost immediately coated my glove where she touched it, but underneath, I felt a warmth that defied explanation. "Come," she whispered, her voice carrying both invitation and warning. "There is something you should see." She led me deeper into the forest, where the trees grew close and dark. Our footsteps left matching prints in the fresh snow, hers perfect crystals that sparkled with inner light, mine merely mortal impressions beside them. The crystal in my pocket grew warmer with each step, its pulse matching the rhythm of our movement. In a clearing stood an ancient shrine, its stone surfaces carved with scenes that caught and held the eye. Warriors battling a force of pure winter. A maiden stepping between humanity and protection. A sacrifice that echoed through centuries. At its center, a crystal much like mine pulsed with a cold blue light that seemed to reach for the Snow Maiden like a lover's touch. Long ago, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient memory. These mountains faced a force that sought to plunge the world into endless winter. The people here had learned to live in harmony with the cold, but this entity, the Frost King, wanted only destruction. His power turned snow to steel, ice to obsidian, winter itself into a weapon. She touched the shrine's surface, and frost spread from her fingers, highlighting the carvings until they seemed to move. A young priestess discovered that the Frost King's power could be bound by an equal and opposite force, the warmth of human love and sacrifice. She offered herself, using her warmth and humanity as the price for his imprisonment. She became the first Snow Maiden, forever walking the boundary between human and spirit. "You're her descendant?" I asked, though in my heart I already knew the answer. "I am her." She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw centuries of solitude. Immortality was part of the price. Each winter, I feel more of my humanity slip away as I maintain his bonds. Each summer, I remember less of what it meant to be human. Her hand still rested on the shrine, and I covered it with mine. The cold bit deep, but I welcomed it. There has to be another way. A balance between sacrifice and survival. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Her voice held wonder and fear in equal measure. Snowflakes swirled between us, carrying the scent of winter roses and possibility. "Because I see you," I said simply. "Not the legend, not the spirit, but you. And no one should face eternity alone." Something shifted in her eyes then, a thaw in glaciers that had stood frozen for centuries. The crystal's pulse quickened, matching the rhythm of our shared breath. "Your warmth calls to me, Ren. Like spring calls to winter, like dawn calls to dusk. But it also endangers you." Her free hand rose to cup my cheek, and frost bloomed across my skin like a caress. The colder I become, the more I hunger for mortal heat. "Then take it." I turned my face into her touch, though every instinct warned against it. The cold burned, but beneath it lay a warmth I'd never known. "Take what you need." "It would destroy you." Fear crept into her voice. Not of me, but for me. "I don't believe that." Another step closer. Frost crawled up my sleeves, but I didn't retreat. The crystal in my pocket blazed with warmth, counterpoint to her winter chill. "You've spent centuries protecting others. Let someone protect you for once." The kiss, when it came, burned with cold fire. Frost spread across my skin, but beneath it, I felt her trembling with long-denied warmth. Her lips were soft as new snow, sweet as ice wine. For a moment, we stood suspended between mortal and immortal, winter and spring, duty and desire. The crystals, both hers and mine, pulsed in harmony, creating a symphony of light and power. Then the shrine's crystal flared with violent light, and she pushed me away. "He feels it," she gasped. "My weakness, my want." Ice spread from her feet, crackling across the clearing with predatory intent. "Run." But I couldn't leave her. Not now. Not ever. "Now, Ren!" she shouted, as a force stronger than life and deadlier than death engulfed her in its frosty fury. Frightened and freezing, I obeyed her command. I ran, far and fast, questioning my decision to leave her, ashamed that I wasn't brave enough to stay. Weeks passed in a chilling blur, a dance of advance and retreat. By day, I worked frantically in my workshop, studying the old stories, combining ancient wisdom with modern science. Steam and ice, copper and crystal, human ingenuity and eternal magic. Surely there was a way to bridge these worlds. By night, she came to me, drawn by my warmth, even as she feared it would destroy us both. We shared moments stolen from winter itself. her cool fingers tracing my inventions with curiosity. My hands teaching her to feel again through layers of protective cloth. Each touch burned with cold, but each burn struck deeper into her frozen heart, awakening feelings she'd thought lost to centuries of ice. "Tell me about the world beyond the mountains," she would ask, as we sat in my workshop, surrounded by the gentle hiss of steam and the ticking of delicate instruments. I described the wonders I'd seen, the machines I'd built, the dreams I still chased. In return, she shared fragments of her human life, memories preserved like flowers in ice, a mother's smile, a sister's laugh, the taste of fresh bread on winter mornings. But as our connection grew stronger, so did the Frost King's attacks. Storms raged with unnatural fury. Avalanches struck without warning. The very air grew sharp with malicious cold that sought to extinguish all warmth. "He feeds on winter's power," she explained one night, as we huddled in my workshop while the wind howled outside. Her hands traced patterns in the frost on my windows, patterns that matched the designs scattered across my workbench. "And I am winter-made flesh. The more I feel, the more power I release into the world, the more his prison weakens. Then we'll find another source of power." I showed her my latest invention, a device that could channel thermal energy, converting heat to cold and back again. Brass pipes twisted like frozen vines, copper coils hummed with contained power, and at its heart sat the crystal the elder had given me, pulsing with possibility. "If we can't break the cycle, we'll change it." She touched the device, leaving swirls of frost in her wake. "You still think science can solve what magic created? I think love can solve what loneliness created." I caught her hand, ignoring the cold that instantly numbed my fingers. The crystal flared brighter at our touch. "Your predecessor used sacrifice to bind him. But what if the answer isn't in losing humanity but in sharing it?" Understanding dawned in her winter-bright eyes. A balance. Yes. Not warm defeating cold, or cold consuming warm, but both existing together, strengthening one another. The storm outside intensified, as if the Frost King himself raged against our discovery. The windows rattled, ice crept across the walls. But in that moment, holding her gradually warming hand, I felt nothing but hope. It took us 3 more days to perfect the device. 3 days of endless storms. 3 days of the village huddling in fear while their protector and a foreign inventor gambled with forces beyond mortal understanding. The villagers brought us supplies without question, their trust in her extending to include me, the outsider who dared to love winter itself. When the final night came, we stood before the ancient shrine as the worst blizzard in living memory raged around us. The crystal prison pulsed with blinding light, ice spreading from its base like reaching fingers. Wind-driven snow carved patterns in the air, beautiful and deadly as the Frost King's power grew. "Are you sure about this?" Her voice barely carried over the wind. She looked more human than I'd ever seen her, fear and hope warring in her expression. "Once we begin, there's no turning back. If we fail, we won't." I activated the device, watching the indicators spin to life. Steam met ice in carefully controlled spirals. The crystal in my pocket pulsed in harmony with the shrine's larger one. "Do you trust me?" "More than I've trusted anyone in centuries." She took my hands, and for the first time, her touch didn't burn with cold. The ritual began simply, her power flowing into the crystal, my device channeling it, transforming it from destructive cold to balanced energy. But as the Frost King felt his prison changing, he fought back with all his ancient fury. Ice spears erupted from the ground. The wind turned solid, sharp enough to cut. The very air crystallized, threatening to freeze us where we stood. Through it all, she stood firm, one hand on the crystal, the other gripped in mine. Our hearts beat in time with the pulsing lights, creating a rhythm older than winter itself. "Hold on," I shouted as the device reached critical levels. Steam and ice met in impossible patterns, neither winning, both transforming. Just a little longer. The cold became unbearable, then transcendent. I felt her power course through me, no longer burning but singing in my blood. My warmth flowed into her, not weakening but growing stronger in the sharing. Science and magic, mortal and spirit, love and duty, all merging into something entirely new. The crystal's light changed from cold blue to warm gold. The Frost King screamed in rage, then wonder, as his prison transformed. No longer a cage of sacrifice, but a lens of balance, focusing and dispersing winter's power in eternal harmony. The storm above calmed, snow falling now in gentle swirls that caught the dawn's first light. When it was over, she stood solid and real in my arms, her skin still cool but no longer deathly cold. "How do you feel?" I asked, brushing snowflakes from her hair, snowflakes that no longer froze instantly at her touch. "Human," she whispered, "but also more, both mortal and spirit, winter and spring." She touched my face, and her fingers left only the faintest trace of frost. "What about you?" I smiled, watching my breath mist in the air. A little cooler, but in a good way. The village celebrated for 3 days when they learned their protector had found both love and balance. The storms still come. Winter will always have its fury. But now they're natural, clean, part of the eternal cycle rather than an ancient being's rage. She has a mortal name now, though I keep it close to my heart. To the village, she's still their Snow Maiden, blessing their crops with gentle frost and calming winter's worst moods. To me, she's simply my love, cool fingers intertwined with mine as we walk the boundary between worlds. Our home sits at the edge of the village, half workshop and half shrine. The devices we create together combine science and magic in ways neither of us could have imagined alone. Steam and ice dance in eternal balance, just as we do. And on the coldest nights, when we watch the aurora dance above the peaks, I remember that some loves are worth braving the storm for. They say opposites attract, but maybe they do more than that. Maybe they complete one another, creating something entirely new in the space between extremes. In the end, that's where we found our answer. Not in conquering the cold or surrendering to it, but in learning to dance with winter itself. And in our dance, we found forever.